I was teaching in the States for 11 years, so I picked up that terminology.
Well, actually, with us, it's a little different. We have like, well, not exactly trimesters, but they're called modules. So we have like 3 modules per semester. And at the end of each module, there is a short or 1 week of finals. Okay. So it's not the overall finals, but it's a bit split up.
Andy says, have you turned it off and on and back on again? Actually, what we're doing now.
Yeah, so YouTube is telling me everything's okay at this end.
Okay, that's good.
It's lying.
I don't know what I'm looking at. He has the controls. I'm just pretending I'm being helpful here.
Yeah, it does say we're live, so I think that's going to happen any moment.
Okay, well, if you can hear us, do please say the word fence post so that Ben can know.
Otherwise, we'll just have to go to a backup stream URL. But everybody's here and expecting to be.
Well, we can announce it here. That's not a problem.
Yeah, we can, if worst case. But you know, this is telling me we're live and it's all good. So.
Yeah, we're not.
Yeah, this is not a bit of a problem now. Okay, I think what I'm going to have to do, we're going to have to go to a backup stream URL because it's just not having it.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm hosting Zoom, so I can't do anything about that.
I'll make the Facebook announcement when it goes live. Or rather, when you have a new stream. There were people in this chat 2 hours ago, by the way.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, but then there was some asking, what the hell is Godot? So
I'm not saying it was particularly relevant. I think one of the pledge goals should be I'll just teach them about the play. Just a whole section about the Beckett play. We had a lot of that in theater. We have things like you send someone out for air hooks for the lamps so we can plug them into the sky and they just go off for 3 hours looking for them. It's not very nice, but you know.
Aha.
What's up?
I think we're live now at last.
Oh, we are?
If we're live, guys, then what we want to see, the secret word is going to be something different. It's going to be daffodil. So I'm just testing the delay here. If first person to type daffodil, that'll tell us how long the delay is. And then we can crack on with it. I'm really sorry about the starting delay.
Oh.
It's so hit and miss. I think next time we have a live stream, we'll just have to start streaming like 20 minutes early and just do you a jig until the actual start time, just to make sure that we start on time.
We're live!
Awesome.
Look at that.
So guys, Lars, Jan, your delay is about 20 seconds, so that's good. We should have audio. If people can confirm, firstly, can they hear me clearly? I'm Ben. Hello. Can you hear me? So say hear Ben if you can hear Jan.
Hi, guys.
And if you can hear Lars.
Hi, this is Lars.
This is Lars from the School of Games. So I'm going to be sitting here keeping an eye on the chat, making sure that the stream technically works. And Jan and Lars are going to talk about why the School for Games switched from Godot to Unity. The name of the stream changed at the last minute because Lars thought that the School for Games somehow was more impressive or important than he was. I don't agree. I think that he is as impressive or more impressive than the institution. But anyway, we have changed the name, so it's why the whole School for Games changed from Unity to Godot. This is not a Unity bash, by the way. Unity actually, secretly, is one of my favorite engines, but there's good reasons why these guys switch from teaching a point of view, and I'm very interested to hear why. So Jan, Lars, take it away.
Okay, so first off, guys, you probably know me by now. I'm me. There's my toucan. First off, Lars, great to see you again. We've had a chat and a few emails back and forth, and you've been very helpful for the course. Would you like to give a very brief introduction of who you are and what you do in the non-sort of screen world?
Sure. I'm the Dean of Engineering at the School for Games. The School for Games is actually one of the major private schools for people who want to get into game programming, game design, or game art. And I've been working there as the dean for like 6 years. I've been teaching for like 10 years and have been developing even before that. I've been working on MMOs in Berlin at Bigpoint. Maybe you know the company. It's actually quite famous for its browser games. I've been working on service backends for other services that are not game related. And yeah, I've been mainly teaching.
Good. So, I mean, I know from our conversations, you've got a really deep and involved understanding of the engine and best practices and best solutions and what makes Godot different, which does beg a few questions. So why don't we start right at the beginning? When did you first come across this engine?
It was actually when I prepared a lecture on different game engines. I knew the major ones, of course, like Unity. We have been using Unity for a long time, so I agree it's not a Unity bash. And we actually just switched for the first semester. So it's about the introduction and about the teaching aspect in the very beginning, where it actually where it most counts. And we have been using Unity a lot because, let's face it, it's the engine that most people will be faced with when they enter the industry. And we've also been teaching Unreal for the same reason. And of course, I knew CryEngine, Lumberyard, all those. And in order to give a good overview of what is out there in terms of engines, I looked at other engines as well and found lots of things. And Godot immediately stood out because of its unique structure. I guess we'll get into the details later, but that was actually when I got first in contact with the engine, and then I spent like 1 or 2 weeks with each engine trying to really get into the workflow, and yeah, that's when I started to like Godot.
Okay, so switching from a really, I'm going to use some jargon here, but a high profile, high impact thing like Unity, right? So I know from a teaching point of view, people go in with a certain expectation. I want to learn this big thing. It doesn't matter what the field is, the big shiny thing. And Unity at the moment is one of the market leaders, right? It didn't always be that way, but right now it's a dominant position. So when you came up with this idea that we should switch from this as the first big project to something that at the time not many people had heard of, was everyone on board? Was it pushback? Did you have to convince a lot of people? Did everyone go, oh yeah, totally, let's do that?
Let's start with my colleagues, because of course this is like a two-step process. First, I had to convince my colleagues to do the step, and then I had to get the students on board. But of course, with the students, it's a little easier because in an institution like the School for Games, people are right next to you, and I can explain all the steps that I'm doing, and there's a deep level of trust. So if I tell them that I know this is the right step for them to do, they trust me, and usually it takes like all through the first semester until they get to the point where they say, okay, now I get it, and you were absolutely right, and now it makes all sense. But of course, convincing the colleagues was a little different, because, as you say, they all knew Unity and they knew the market position of Unity, and they hadn't heard of Godot, most of them. And of course, my colleagues aren't programmers; they are game designers, artists, and mostly producers, and well, just coming from a teaching perspective. But I had prepared my arguments quite well, and there's quite a lot to say in terms of or in favor of the engine. And yeah, it still took quite some convincing, but in the end, yeah, at some point, each of them came back to me and said, "Well, I understand now, and it was the right decision."
Yeah, that actually reminds me of, there was a Reddit post where you talked about your experience with us and how it initially doesn't feel like a great fit, and then we talked a bit and you sort of steered us right. And then you made a really interesting point where a university environment, whether it's graduate or postgraduate or even, I guess, a summer camp, is a very different proposition. Because we have to engage people where a lot of people just took the course because, oh, this feels like fun, and we need to design projects in a very specific way. So when you're designing those sort of longer term big projects, I'm kind of geeking out from an educational point of view. It will get back to programming in a moment, I promise, guys. What kind of projects do you set up for Godot? What's your syllabus look like? What's your journey?
Actually, I think from it actually like from the other perspective. Of course I'm preparing like small projects to show in the first courses where I introduce people to the engine. But actually my strategy is to use Godot so people have a different learning experience on their own projects. Every student has to form a team, and there are like 5 or 6 teams in the first semester, and they all have to do a semester project, which lasts for the full first half year.
Mm-hmm.
And in that first semester, we focus on stuff that everybody has to learn, like, for example, programming even for artists and game designers, and modeling for programmers, and stuff like that, so that everybody is on the same ground level and knows what the other people are doing.
Right.
And that means that the programming courses, the really hardcore programming courses, can't start until the beginning of the second semester. So I needed to absolutely make sure that the environment that people are working in would have the strongest positive impact on them that it could possibly have.
Yeah.
And so the projects that we ask of people to do are actually just, we're just telling them you have a selection of like 3 prototypes that come along with Godot. And you can pick one of those and then make a modification of it. Actually, not a modification like in another game, a mod, but you can come up with your own ideas and you can completely rebuild it if you want. But you can go on from what you have in the templates or in the demo projects. So the students really are at liberty to do whatever they want. But I find that Godot structure leads them in the right direction, in the direction that I hope for them to understand and to see.
That makes sense. And I'm kind of fascinated that everyone that gets into this engine that I've spoken to sort of has a different hook. Like for me, I opened it and it just felt joyous. It was very playful. You know, Unity for me had an entry barrier. It was like, oh, this feels very sterile. And Blender, I opened it for the first time and screamed because none of the buttons did what I thought they did. But then I showed it to Ben, and for him, and I'm speaking for you, Ben, you can certainly step in here. It felt very full featured. You know, it was kind of pretty close to like what Unity can do. I mean, it's not Unity, and obviously Unity is a much bigger project, but it was a lot further developed than one might think. Mikey went into it is like, oh my god, the 3D render is amazing. Like this is much better than what I thought would come out of an open source project. He was playing in the office, and it was just rendering incredible visual fidelity. What is it for you that hooked you? I mean, you've talked about the bit of structure, but specifically, what is it that hooked you from an educator point of view? What makes it great for beginners?
That's actually a bit of a difficult question because I have to go back in my memory and try to remember, because I have been trained to like point out the big advantages that I can sell to my colleagues. But now that you're telling this, I do remember that the engine just has so many great advantages for teachers. For example, the whole engine, everything, not including the demos and not including the export templates, but the whole engine is like 40 megabytes, I think. The download
26.
is 26, and if you unpack it,
It's
install
tiny.
it, it's just unpacking. It's like 40 or 50. It's nothing. And so I've had it several times that in lectures with like Unreal, somebody didn't have the engine installed, and it took like half the day to catch up and get them to the same point where the rest of the course already has arrived at. And with Godot, I can just hand out.
I remember the first time I was getting Ben to download it, and he went, I've got the download file, but it's 26 meg. Where's the engine? I'm like, it is the engine. Yeah, but how do I unpack it? That's the engine. But where is it? So there's definitely that size.
So this is absolutely fascinating, and it's beautiful. And that combined with a beautiful build system, which is also fascinating for a programmer, because usually, I mean, every old age programmer has been through the CMake and AutoMake and all those fiascos. And it's beautiful. You just basically download it and hack in a few keywords, and it's done. And yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah. So from a teacher point of view, that makes sense. What about for your students? What's their reaction to it being?
Well, the first reaction I got from the students where I held the lecture on the different engines, and they had sort of mixed feelings. Some of them, I think, were a bit shocked by the fact that they were confronted with something else, or with something that exceeded their comfort zone. So they were used to Unity and were hoping kind of like that Unity was the one engine they had to work with in their entire life. And of course, that's not the case. But I noticed that especially those students that had difficulty getting into programming, they were very optimistic about it. And there were at least 2 that clearly stated that they think if they had started out with a Godot, they wouldn't have given up on programming. They were game designers, not game programmers. So our game designers have to program as well. They need to be able to write their own prototypes. But of course, we tolerate it when somebody says, no, it's absolutely nothing for me. But we actually haven't had that, as far as I know, since we've introduced Godot. So this threshold has been significantly lowered. And that's a big thing about Godot.
Quick question, Lars, from the community here, from Derek Stobbs. Do you teach in 2D or 3D? I think I know the answer, but just to let them know.
We have been using Godot 2 so far, so we didn't expect people to use 3D much. We don't forbid any of those. We're assuming that people would be using 2D. And in the first semester, I think we had one project that used 3D, but mainly for technical reasons. It was actually a 2D game. And in the second semester, or the second year, we had at least one, let me think, at least one 3D game that actually thought about switching to Godot 3. And I'm expecting with Godot 3 to have more 3D projects than before.
Okay. And to be clear, Derek, if you were asking about us, then of course we're going to be doing both in the course that the Kickstarter is all about.
Yep.
And then, Jan, sorry, crack on. Keep going through Lars's questions. I just wanted to bring that in.
No, it's a good question. It actually reminded me of a thing which has just fled my mind. So that's professional.
Well, maybe I can add a few details.
List of questions from Lars. So.
Maybe I can add a few details about the 2D versus 3D thing. Godot does have a separate renderer for 2D and for 3D. And that's a beautiful thing because in Unity, for example, you have like pseudo 2D. And from the technical side, there are many not so beautiful things about the 2D stuff. For example, if you want to have an icon 10 pixels above something else in Unity, you have to calculate where it is. In Godot, it's just y minus 10, and it's there. So it's really beautiful. But apart from that, the structure is very similar between 2D and 3D. And I think once you've learned 2D, the step to 3D isn't that big. It's mostly about the different settings and the tools you have at hand and stuff like that.
I was actually surprised by that because we weren't expecting to get to 3D for quite a few sections because I wanted, well, we feel like most of the time you want a really solid understanding of 2D before you even add these things. But then the other day when Mikey and I just were playing around and made a quick game, it was like, actually, if you understand the fundamentals of 2D, there's really not that much more you need.
Absolutely.
It's a different colored node pretty much covers it. And then here's how you deal with the y-axis. I mean, it's surprisingly well structured, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Do you find students resistant to the idea of writing in GD script? And what are your feelings on the whole GD script, C#? What should I write in?
Again, it's different for people who have experience with C# and those who don't have any experience. Those who don't have any experience, more often than not, are actually thankful for GDScript because it boils down everything to a level that they can understand, and they can understand easily, and where they can reason about it. And that's actually the reason why I think it's so valuable, especially for people who already know other programming language, to go back to, or what it's not actually go back, it's to go to GDScript and go to that level, because it forces you to really polish your code on that level. Well, I don't have a good comparison, but it's imagine that you can't use any fancy words and you have to explain like a very fancy algorithm or some chemical process or anything. You just are allowed to use everyday words. And it feels like that for a programmer to use GDScript because you really have to focus on choosing the right words, to picking the right names, writing good self-documenting code, coming up with good structures. And it really pushes you into the right tools to use because Godot uses several different languages. It uses C++ for the backend, uses GDScript for the scripting layer, and it also uses the graphical editor and the so-called inspector and the scene hierarchy. And that's actually a third language. It's a declarative language that you can use. In many cases, you can use it as a replacement for GDScript code. And that's something that people also need to understand, that doing stuff in a graphical declarative way is not like a cheap cop-out. It's not what many experienced programmers think, like a cheap way to evade the trouble. It's actually a different way of explaining the same things. And in many cases, it's a better way to do the same things. So don't feel bad if you use those techniques. That's actually the smart way to go. But there's this idea that complicated code was in any way better or more magical, and yeah, you have to work through that. And so with experienced programmers, I get that every now and then that people are a little reluctant, but they're fine with it because, as I said, in our situation, we have a lot of trust, and they just go along. And at the end of the semester, they usually reach a point where they understand, at least when they go into Unity coming from Godot, they understand how C#, for example, has this level. You can write code just like GDScript code in C#.
Right.
You just have to understand why you should do that. And that's the difficult thing. In C#, it's really difficult to understand because you have all the options and you can mix and match, and you don't see why you shouldn't mix and match. And in GDScript or in Godot, you have those separate layers, and you have to understand, or the difference between the different languages is really, it really stands out, and you do learn it when you work with it.
That reminds me a lot of the question we often get is, why should I use this engine, or why should I learn this engine if I understand this one? And for me, I mean, we have a bunch of different answers, but for me, it's because if you want to learn to make games at anything above a hobby level, at a hobby level, use whatever you're comfortable with. But if you're looking to go beyond that, you shouldn't be learning to program in an engine. You should be learning to use this engine with your programming, right? The idea is have as many tools as possible and use the right tool in that situation, which I guess leads to a follow-on question, which is, when should I use C#? This is one we get asked a lot, but what's your view? When is C# the correct answer in Godot?
I'd say use C# if you need to, and if you're very certain that you know how to. It's a difficult question. In my experience, C# leads to how do I put it? I don't want to sound too mean because I'm actually a fan of C#. I like C#, but the point about C# is that it adds in a lot of functionality. It has grown immensely over time, and for those people that have been using Unity in the last few years, they are in for a treat when now C#7 comes out and is enabled in Unity, and they'll have to learn like a completely new language. There's so much new stuff coming, and even C# 3.5 had a lot of interesting stuff in it. And so it gives you a tremendous open space to work in. And yeah, as I said, it completely removes those rails. That's something that is a big advantage in languages like Java, which often leads to those misunderstandings. Many people ask, if C# is objectively better than Java, why are people using Java? Well, because it's in a way objectively worse, in that it doesn't give you the ability or the option to do stuff so extravagantly.
Now, I'm seeing some reports that the stream is crashing. Ben, you might have to stop and start it on OBS, because that's what happened to us.
Yeah, I'm also going to suggest to people that they watch a little tiny bit behind real time, because that tends to help as well.
Well, I know we were having this broadcasting problem the other day, and stopping.
Yeah, so I'm going to do a couple of things. I am going to stop and restart OBS.
Just about a minute.
Yeah, and I'm going to show them a graphic as to how they should watch a little bit behind real time.
Okay.
So like this.
We should be coming back soon. When they complain about my singing, we will know. I've got a cat on the keyboard. No, get off the keyboard. No.
And you can't tell me that you don't have like a button on your keyboard where you can immediately switch the background to like Hawaii or...
Well, behind this is a green screen. And when I teach English online, that's exactly what I do. But it didn't seem relevant here.
They want you to keep singing, Jan. You've got to keep singing.
They told me my singing. Okay, more singing. You should all learn to do some Godot. There we go. There's your song. Graphic.
Awesome. So let's keep it going. It's going well now, I think. If people watch a tiny bit behind real time, just click back on the YouTube bar per the link I just gave you. Then I think that should even out any stream problems, and you'll still get your questions answered, albeit 1 or 2 minutes later.
So apparently the last thing before the crash was why coding in a graphical interface like specifically the inspector counts as programming. So we did have some quite interesting topics on there, but let's recap a little bit. When would you advise using C# over GDScript?
I'd say you have to feel very confident with it. There are situations where using C# is advantageous. But in general, I would prefer the limitations of GDScript and C++ over the freedom of C#. You always have to keep in mind that the freedom that you take for yourself by using a more liberal language, are the freedoms that you give your colleagues. And nothing against my colleagues, but I personally like a little guidance in my languages. So if I have a language that pushes me in the right direction, I will prefer that. That being said, there are situations where using C# makes sense. You don't have to recompile the engine in order to write backend functionality. And yeah, it's much easier to step back and forth between high-level and low-level code in C#.
Yeah, and I know specifically for someone like me who had to, I mean, I taught myself coding. My degree's in drama and education. I've always been interested in it, but unlike Ben, I don't have a comp sci degree. So it took me a while to write code that would even make sense to someone else. It worked, but when Ben would say things like, how does it work? I don't know. I just put it together. So even beyond, but never mind teaching, if you're in a team of coders, you need this to work. Let's see, I've got a thing
Also,
here.
never forget that the scripting layer is actually, well, I like to put it like this. Programming is not about talking to the computer. Just the other day, someone mentioned in a talk that they thought, well, languages like English are about people talking with each other, and programming languages are about people talking to a computer. That's not the case.
No.
Programming languages, all except the very first machine languages, the so-called first-generation languages, all other languages are purely about making the code easier to read and understand and reason about by human people. And so, especially with scripting languages, that's really the core point of it all. To write code in a way that allows you to really sync up with your team and work on the same project. Not just in the sense of we are all working on the same project file, but also in the sense of that when I say I'm finished with the player, everybody else knows what I'm finished with.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say I'm finished with the loading manager because that doesn't tell the artist anything. If I'm saying I'm done with the player, the artist knows, okay, now I didn't prepare any graphics for the player. Maybe I should think about what a player looks like. And that's something they can reason.
I'd like to add something here just to support this, Lars, which is that you need to read about 10 lines of code each time you want to insert one line of code, the stats, something like that, of that order of magnitude. So the clarity of your code is super important. I don't know how many times you ever got to a point in a project where it's like, I just need to make a simple change, but where do I add it? If you got the architecture and the clarity of the code right, then there can only be one place you add it. If you're trying to make the player jump, you look for player or player movement, you know. The second thing is, if less code for the same functionality, the same behavior, is generally better, but provided it's still beautifully readable. And one of the things about GDScript is it is less code. So if you, when I'm translating these prototype projects that we've already put together from C# to GDScript to C#, we're roughly doubling the number of lines of code. And if you were to go from C# to C++, you would probably almost double the number of lines of code again, all told with the header files. So just to say, you know, less is more if everything else is equal, and GDScript really allows you to do that. So that's just my observation.
People sometimes complain about the tools in GDScript because, in Godot, you have an integrated editor to write GDScript, and they sometimes find it lacking because you don't have like code collapsing. I think they added it recently.
The code collapse is now in, yeah.
Yeah, but things like that were missing for a long time, and I can totally understand why they were missing, because I think I almost always manage to get all the important code on the first screen. So I always try to write my code so that when you open the file on the first screen, you get like an overview of what's happening. And then the details come further below. But all the important stuff should be right at the top. So you don't have to scroll, you don't have to search. You just open it up and you see right there what's going on.
Here. And I should add at this point that we will also in the course be showing you how to use Visual Studio Code as an option, which is a great transferable skill, and it has a Godot plugin which makes life really easy for you. And for the C# conversions, I will be using Visual Studio because that's the right thing to use for C#. So lots of options. You don't have to code inside Godot Script Editor. You've got 3 options, 2 of which are very industry standard. So all good stuff.
I think that's one of the things that I really fell in love with very quickly with Godot is that it will give you a ton of options for ways to do things. But unlike a lot of other, not just engines, but pieces of software, it won't show you every option unless you need it. For instance, it'll show you an animation player whenever you need an animation player, but if you don't, it's just not on screen. That has led to a couple of situations where, when, for instance, Mikey was trying to make a test area from Blender in Godot, and he created a world environment and didn't know, everything's just gone dark. Where are my lights? You have to press this button and do that. Although I think that's being fixed in 3.1 with a new inspector. But it does a great job of adding options without adding complexity.
Yep, I agree.
Which sort of brings me to, what kind of success stories have you seen from your students, and what do you think is going to be coming next from this engine?
We were actually really positively surprised with the projects the students did. We usually do like a big post on Facebook in the Godot group whenever they are done, and we try to get them always on the best of reel. We haven't always found the time to do that, but we try to. And so we are actually really thrilled with the quality we got out of our students with it. And well, we'll have to wait and see what kind of success stories or what kind of great games we might get out of Godot. There's always a lot of luck involved. I mean, if you were asking somebody if you should use like pure Java to write your own engines to make a game, they would say that's crazy. Don't do that. And yeah, that's exactly what Notch did, and he's probably like the richest indie developer of all time. So there's a lot of luck involved and a lot of situational advantages or disadvantages. And so we can't really predict what's going to happen. But I'm actually pretty sure that Godot is going to influence the whole indie community in a very good way. Because as we've talked about, it helps you write in a good style, and it helps you understand certain mechanics and structures. And I'm expecting that people will learn that from Godot, and then whatever engine they work in will make good use of that understanding and that structure.
And it brings out information in a very easy to pass way, at least if you use it in the way it's designed to be used. I remember when we were looking at adding state machines, like where should I put state machines in the course? It's a really important thing to know. Like of course, you can write games without them. And then I went and saw GD Quest's open source on a different node. And it's just much easier, and Godot really helps unpack that. What do you think it would take for Godot to become the next Unity success story? Because I remember the first couple of games for Unity came out, everyone was like, why would you use this engine? And then all of a sudden Unity is everywhere. What do you think it would take for Godot to hit that level?
Well, one really successful game would, of course, help. That's what people are always asking for when they look into the engine. They always ask, what has been done with this engine? And yeah, it's a bit frustrating because it's like judging a book by its cover. And you should, of course, look behind its surface. Honestly, I don't really know. I think it already has got what it takes. And I think it's, at least when it comes to those great 2D indie games that have been so successful in the last time, Godot has everything that you need for that.
Yep.
Maybe it might actually just be this thing that we are doing. It might just need this little push in the right direction for the developers to make that step, to understand how to use the tools properly, and really unlock all the options they have. For example, there's still a big, how do you put it? I think many people are still not, they don't dare to really make use of the C++ backend and really extend the engine. And I think that's something that enables you to be much more productive with the engine if you really learn to do all the reusable stuff in C++, bake it into the engine, and then the next time you do like a game jam, you have it right there. You just create a node and it's done. You don't need to rewrite anything.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that it can be used from everything from, there's a Godot gaming Kickstarter right now called Transmogrify, which I happen to back. It looks kind of fun. It's a cute little game. It's, a lot of fun. But you can also do things like RPG in a Box, which is a debranded, complete rewrite of the Godot engine to make 3D RPGs for people. So it's just, here's a brand new way to use this engine where you don't even have to know what Godot is. And you've got everything in between. Do you want to rewrite the engine for your purposes or use it as intended to make a solid game? Where do you think Godot's development will go? I mean, we've talked a little bit about where do you think it will go in success stories and in the marketplace, but 3.1 is coming. 3.1 is incredibly exciting. In fact, I've run out of brain space to keep in mind how many features they're adding. Every time someone mentions, oh, right, CSG is coming. Where do you think it's going next? What do you think 4 will look like?
Yeah, again, I'll have to take a look into the crystal ball there. It's really difficult to say at this point. It was quite easy at the time of 2.1, where you were looking towards 3.0, because, of course, redoing the 3D part was like the obvious choice. And we didn't expect the great rework of the audio system. We didn't expect the fantastic rework of the animation system that's coming in 3.1.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to that one. I'm a big fan of the animation player.
Oh yeah.
And it's actually programming. That's we can go back to that topic again later. And but right now the development is going in different directions. We have got C# as a new addition. We've got GD Native with the new languages, and I mean, they have surprised me in the past with the audio manager and with the animation player. But it looks like now we're reaching a point where the feature set is nicely rounded off. There may be another addition like a terrain editor and things like that. But that's actually an addition. It's not like a completely new direction of development. So on the one hand, we may see great surprises. We may see what I would consider the best solution, a phase of solidifying and debugging and cleaning up the code and reworking everything we've achieved so far. I'm afraid that we might see too rapid growth of the community along with lack of understanding the part of some of those that are coming.
Yeah.
I mean, we are working on the understanding right now, but this is always the biggest danger for open source projects. So I'm not saying that this in regard to the Godot community or Unity users or C# users or anything like that. I'm saying that just in the experience I got from other open source projects that suffered from this very phenomenon. So too rapid growth that leads to people taking part too eagerly before they have completely understood the philosophy. That's, in my mind, the biggest danger that open source projects face.
Yeah, and I think that was, if I remember, what triggered you getting in contact with us in the first place, is just to make sure you're not just teaching this as like another Unity.
Yeah.
Because
Exactly.
really, Unity is Unity. If you want to use Unity, use Unity. Oh my God, Ben's disappeared. Unity is Unity. If you want to use Unity, you should use Unity. But
Absolutely.
Godot is its own thing.
Yeah.
It reminds me of when I was playing MMOs and World of Warcraft came out, and every MMO became World of Warcraft and crashed because there is World of Warcraft. You don't need that.
With games, I can kind of understand it. I mean, if there's one World of Warcraft and there's another one that's just like it but has a different skin or just some other features, then I'm gonna play that as well. Or I'm gonna start playing it when I've finished playing World of Warcraft, when I've grown tired of it. But engines are tools. I don't need another tool that goes right in the same direction. But instead, I want another tool. I want to have those options. I mean, people are still using frameworks. They don't even use engines. They're still using frameworks. They're still using engines without graphical toolsets, like, for example, Ogre 3D or other engines from that era that don't have, like a scripting layer or a graphical editor and things like that. They're still using that. And there are still use cases for it because they have different terminologies. I mean, when you program a game in an engine, you're basically just telling people what the game does using the terminology provided by the engine. And every engine has its unique terminology.
Yeah.
So that's actually, in my mind, the biggest difference between Godot, Unity, and Unreal, that they all use slightly different terminologies. And when you boil it down to that, they're actually not slightly different. They are extremely different.
I think that's a very good way of looking at it. It's one of the questions we ask a lot, or I see asked a lot, both in our Discord and Facebook and also on the Godot Facebook, is, could I make this game in Godot? And the answer is a qualified yes. And by qualified, I mean, you can make a game in that tool. Of course you can. Like, it will look different. However, the way the tool interacts with you will alter the ideas you have, how to solve it, what new features you come up with. So you might end up with a slightly different game.
The question, can I do this with an engine? It's a bit like asking, can I cut paper when I have a car? Yes, you can, but the car's not going to help you. And just like that, you can always make every game. The question is, how much does one specific engine help you? And of course, the task of any real-life developer will be to make best use of the engine.
Yeah.
Not just to have an idea in mind and then take one engine. Many people claim that picking the engine is just a matter of taste. That's, in my mind, that's totally not true.
Yeah.
Because picking the wrong engine, even if it feels right to you may just give you the wrong tools and not at all help you with the things that you actually have to solve.
Yeah,
that's why we're sorry to interrupt you, and that's why we're so keen people have perspective here. You know, people are saying we're giving up on Unity. Absolutely not. Unity is our central pillar, but we would make very weak Unity developers if they didn't have the perspective that something as simple and streamlined as a 20-something megabyte download of Godot gives you, with all, and when they see how much power that has, which is such a simple engine, and the extensibility of it, etc. And then on the other end of the scale, we've got Unreal C++ and its massive tool sets, its massive downloads, its massive learning curve. And they're all right for depending on what you're doing and what stage you're at. You know, if you've got a funded studio that's trying to make a beautiful looking game that has a lot of first or third person shooting in it, that's got that wants AI behavior trees, that wants to look beautiful, that's going to run on a high spec machine. And you're going to use Unreal probably for that. You know, if you're an early indie who's just getting into it, frankly, you just need to get some stuff shipped. And one of the easiest ways to get something shipped is going to be Godot. And there's a million other situations where you could be that studio with 15 people. And Godot's the right answer for you again, because nothing out there that currently exists has the right tool set. And we'll be talking about that later in the week, about how to customize the tool set for you. Godot gives you a level of customization nothing else does. So you're not going to understand what's right for you until you have some perspective of actually using these things. So yeah. I'm saying fall in love with 2 or 3 engines, but only marry one of you. You may only choose to marry one of them at the end of the day. I set up your studio around it and really go with it, but date 2 or 3 first.
And it's interesting. We had Ben had a dinner, and most of the team was there. Not Rick, because he lives in Australia, and the commute would kill him. And then we just had this game that I'd made, and Sam sat down, and we had an indie developer, and I'm not going to name drop him because he hasn't given us permission to do so. And he's been programming pretty successful games in Unity, and he hadn't really heard much about Godot. He knew it was out there, and then he saw it, and I showed him the code. He went, "Oh, that's really simple." And it's just, there are times where this is the right engine, but it's key to point out that when we say this is the right engine, we don't mean because Godot solves this problem and Unity is good with these maths and Unreal is pretty. It's because there's a whole work environment here. There's an observer effect, right? The engine changes how you make the game. In this, I don't know why I'm using quantum mechanics as an easy metaphor.
There was once an interview with the programmer of Super Meat Boy. He stated, I think they did it in XNA. I'm certain it was some framework, not an engine, but I'm not sure which one it was. And he was asked why they didn't do it in Unity. And he said, well, we could have done it in Unity, but we wouldn't have done this game. It would have been a different game. And that's exactly what we are talking about. And also, I would like to add that even if we're not talking about the suitability, the like physical suitability of the engine towards a problem, but just about the learning experience, even then I can't recommend enough for people who just want to use one engine to look into other engines, and specifically into Godot, because I remember those first 2 weeks when I got into the engine, I really noticed from day to day how my understanding of structures that I could use in Unity changed and evolved. And after those 2 weeks, I started building Unity projects completely different and much more in a grown-up way.
Let's see. I've got some questions I should go through. What do you think of these new language additions? C#, GD native. What are your views on Visual Script? Like, what do you think about all these languages coming into Godot?
Well, we talked about C#, and there's actually quite a lengthy issue debate on GitHub when it first was announced that it would be added. And I was quite vocal about my concerns of adding it. As I mentioned, it's very different from the philosophy that Godot had so far. But I think once you've made your peace with it, it's actually a great addition. And if you know how to use it, if you have the trust that you can really use it, then it's a great tool set, especially since hopefully it won't stick with C#, but instead adding mono means adding all of the mono languages. And I personally am really excited about adding F#, which is like an opinionated variant of C#. Whereas C# is a very open language, and it doesn't really tell you to do anything in a specific way. F# is very different in that aspect, and it really, some things that are considered bad habits are just forbidden in F#. And so it's, again, more in the direction of GDScript, and it's functional first, so it's, again, a different approach. And so it's a really interesting addition. And hopefully we will see similar results from the GD Native edition. I haven't used the C++ edition yet because so far I find the syntax a bit difficult.
Yeah.
But I've seen they've done a first tutorial, and they mentioned that they're going to evolve the language. And I think I'm going to do some suggestions. I think they can utilize tools that they used in Unreal, where they built like a custom preprocessor. So you can simplify many things that you would have to write yourself just by adding a keyword, and the preprocessor writes the code for you.
Yeah.
Just the boilerplate code that now you would have to write.
I have a quick question, relevant question here from Keith Scholes, which is it possible to now, so obviously it wasn't in the past, to use C# to generate actual executable Godot programs?
I think it's in the work. I don't know if it's out yet. I think it's going to be ended with 3.1.
I think it's actually been patched in. I heard rumors. I haven't actually seen this confirmed. It's in 3.03, but if it's not, it's in 3.1. I know that Russ, a member of our community, Spec Chum on the Discord, and one of our moderators in the Facebook group, actually keeps a build with that fix in it for people who want it. But it is coming if it's not already out.
Yeah, it's just a matter of weeks.
At any time now, absolutely. Yep. And that'll be in our
stream's died.
Has it?
Yep. Just seeing it now.
Okay, bear with me. I'm not seeing that the screen.
Wiggle the OBS.
Yeah, I'll go wiggle my OBS, but I'm not seeing that it's died this end.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not convinced it has died, to be honest. I think people
Everyone
need to refresh.
Saying it's down.
What's that?
Everyone in chat saying it's down. I'm a little teapot, short and stout. Here is my handle. Here's another handle. Crap, I'm a sugar bowl.
I'm not seeing it down, so I'm just going to see if they... Oh, okay, they're starting to say it's down.
Did you do the OBS refresh?
Okay, I will do that now.
Okay, I don't know why I'm singing.
Love OBS. I'm really beginning to have a love-hate relationship.
Good idea. Ready?
Proper professional bit of software. So the stream is cycled. Again, remember to watch a few seconds back, guys. Once you're back on, I'll remind them that in a second with a quick image as to how to do that.
So we lost it in the middle of Keith Scholl's question. So Ben, bring back Keith Scholl's question. I'm sorry I wasn't singing this time.
No worries. So Keith Scholl was saying, can we now actually create executable games with Godot using C#? And the answer is yes, that will be in the course, is the bottom line that you need to know.
If you mean, can you today export C#? I'm hearing rumors that it was pushed in a patch today. I don't know how credible they are. If not, it'll be in 3.1, which according to Lars is out in a couple of months, which I was not expecting. I was expecting the end of the year.
I was saying that
not Lars, I'm sorry, not Lars.
So, yeah, you can do all of your development in C# now. We know that because we're doing it, and it does spawn a separate instance. So you're most of the way there. But if you want to actually ship fully, then you may need to wait just a little bit. But it's not going to be long, and it'll be in the course.
Yep. Lars, what are your views on Visual Scripter? Yeah, that's my view too.
It's difficult. I mean, there's a lot of misconceptions about it. The first thing you hear that it's great for non-programmers, and there's two things that bother me about it. First thing, there's no such thing as a non-programmer.
Yeah.
There's something like a beginner programmer or a bad programmer. But there's no non-programmer. If you are the one on the team feeling responsible for the execution of the game or for the hardware side, then in my eyes, you are the programmer, no matter what tools you use. If I'm the one responsible for the graphics, I'm the artist, no matter if I use stamps or clip arts or whatever. So you can be a very unexperienced programmer or a very bad programmer, but you can't be a non-programmer. I think this is important to notice because once you establish this idea of a non-programmer, you're giving programmers the idea that they shouldn't be using those tools. And that's just as wrong. Again, as I said, the hierarchy and the inspector are a declarative programming language, and you should make as much use of it as you can. It's usually the best way to solve things. So in general, I'm positive about those kinds of languages. And you should be aware, you should really evaluate them. But so far, I haven't seen one that really convinced me of using them.
Yeah.
Mostly because the additional options you get from a visual programming language are really narrow. It's mostly just placing nodes somewhere on the screen, and this position doesn't have an actual meaning. I haven't seen code that got really easier to read due to the placement of the nodes. it happens really seldom that somebody manages to do that. And even then, you could usually just, if you group nodes, like for example, in several rows, you could just group those in a function instead and have the same structure in any text. So basically, the main difference between a text file and a node-based programming language is that just that in the text file, the arrows are always implicit from one line to the next, and you don't even need those arrows. I'm expecting that in the near future, somebody will find a good use for the placement of the nodes. For example, I could imagine that you have like a visual scripting language specifically for multi-threading or for distributed computing for several computers. We have like the top screen for the one computer and the bottom screen for the other one. And if you pull a node from the top half to the bottom half, then this line automatically becomes an RPC. So that would be something where you really have a meaning. And of course, I'm generally very much in favor of visual programming languages. As I said, the inspector is a visual programming language, and the animation player is a visual programming language, where the placement of the small dots, which are actually like the same as nodes, they're just not little boxes, but just little points. The placement is the point in time where this call happens in the coroutine. So this is another example of a visual programming language where the position actually has it actually contains a value for the programmer. So once we find something like that for the node-based visual programming languages, I think they're going to be a great tool. But so far, I've tried using them with beginners, but I think the phase when they actually profit from these kind of languages is so short that it's a matter of a couple of hours, and then they're better off using text language.
I found something very similar, I have to say, in that when I first heard about it, like I first opened Godot, and someone somewhere had written visual script is for people who don't know how to use the code yet, which isn't true. So I tried it and I couldn't make head nor tail of this thing. I didn't know how it worked. Then when I learned GD script, I found I could very easily use visual script, but at that point, there was no reason to do so. It wasn't faster, it wasn't more efficient, it wasn't easier to read. I'd gone past the point where it was useful for me. So I agree. It's almost like it has an identity crisis at the moment.
But you can see that there's something on the horizon. For example, if you look at blueprints in Unreal, that's kind of evolving into a functional first language, because it encourages you to, for example, mark functions as pure, which means that now they are more kind of declarative instead of imperative, in that they don't have a fixed point in time when they're executed. They will be executed by the engine when the right point in time is achieved. The engine decides by itself, and that of course allows it to improve the performance and gives you all kind of benefits, as you know from functional programming. Or for example, for shader programming, which is inherently functional, it's another great tool. So for functional programming, it's fantastic, but for imperative programming, which is all about change of state, it's, in my experience, not a very great tool yet.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I'm also very interested in what you're saying about there's no such thing as a non-programmer, because this is a conversation I tend to have a lot either with people I study drama with or with people that I study programming with. There's this notion that I'm creative, I'm logical, you're a human being. You're all of these things. I remember the first time I explained the concept of elegance in code to theater majors, and it blew their minds that there is actually a very creative and artistic part to writing good code. You can write functional code. Can you write elegant code? And it matters. It impacts everything.
Ironically, I'm coming from a very similar direction. I used to be a professional musician. And when I was 30, I decided that music just wasn't my thing and that I wanted to go in the programming direction. And people asked me, how can you give up all of this, and aren't you going to miss the creative freedom? And actually, I found that programming is far more creative, especially in terms of creative freedom, than sitting in an orchestra where you have to play the right note at the right time and the right expression, and the right is always defined by the rest of the orchestra.
Yeah,
so
and from a storytelling point of view, from my end, it for me, coding is storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely.
The story I'm telling is how the sprite moves, and we're pretending the sprite is a bunny, but it's a story. I'm
it's a lot about verbal skills. When I have new applicants, I usually vet them more about their verbal abilities than their logic abilities. I mean, you immediately think of logic abilities when it comes to programming. So people aren't.
Crashed again.
Oh, okay.
And we are going to use a different platform, I think, next time. We're going to have to get through this series of them, but A lot of people are saying to use something like Twitch or another platform. The stream has been recycled, so just give them just a second.
Okay, we were saying a thing just now. It was about coders not necessarily being good at what we call logical deduction, but actually having good verbal reasoning skills.
Mm.
Okay, so do you want to pick up on that?
Okay, yeah. So we were talking about that. I like to vet my new applicants more about their verbal abilities than their logic abilities, because when it comes to programming, everybody immediately thinks of being good at math, at physics, and at logical thinking. And when people totally suck at those, they usually don't apply. But people often don't really think about the communication aspect. And code is communication. It's all about explaining the other programmers and you in the future. You are basically your future colleague, what's happening. And that's the key point in writing code that's maintainable and that stays bug-free.
Yep, I think that's very solid. Now, you've mentioned in passing object-oriented programming and the way Godot is. Why is that so important? I mean, doesn't it sound like it's starting to become obsolete?
Yeah, you hear a lot of rumors. There's a lot of fancy articles about functional programming, about data-driven design, especially data-driven. Functional was like the big phase in the last years. Now it's more like ECS and data-driven. And there are a lot of people who actually claim that object orientation is coming to its end and the other paradigms are going to take over. And I haven't found one of those yet where I didn't get the strong feeling that either they have some kind of misunderstanding in object orientation, or they are missing this point that we have just been talking about, this communication aspect.
Yeah.
There's hardly any game engine that uses object orientation at the bottom level. Down at the lowest code, it's all data driven. It's all that's why it's written in C++, because C++ still at its core is like C with classes, which was its original aim. So you can still write C code, which is very much data focused. You just have a block of data and you run functions on that data. And C++ allows you to write object-oriented code, but just as a layer on top of that data-oriented code. So these things that are now popping up with ECS and data-driven, they're actually quite established in the game industry. But they are now popping up as recommendations for writing game code. And that's where I think you're risking a lot, because game code is supposed to be this layer that translates between all the different departments of the game development. Game designers, for example, tend to use procedural. It's like the most basic way to think about programming. When you think of a cooking recipe, it's procedural. You have like your list of ingredients, and then you have a list of commands that you are supposed to fulfill. And those commands use the ingredients from before, but they also make use of the environment.
And we have a Steam crash.
Ah, come on.
No, not again.
So we used YouTube because the only way you can do Kickstarter is if you're all collaborators, and it just got really messy. It's like you're collaborating for an hour and just, Kickstarter with. So YouTube was like, use us.
So we'll go to the final. I've recycled the stream. We'll go to the final community questions shortly, and I will work to use a completely different pipeline for the next stream. We'll have one more go on YouTube, but if YouTube can't serve us, then we'll have to go somewhere else.
I think that's fair. Okay, well, in that case, Ben, do you want to bring up some community questions?
Yeah, there's just 2 or 3 here that are interesting.
So should I try to finish that?
Last thing Lars said was about ECS and data-driven being already established.
Yeah, so just do finish that point, Lars.
Exactly. Yeah, it's established on a backend layer, but it's not established on a front-end or high-level layer. And that's for a good reason, because as I started to say that people usually like to think in a procedural way. Like cooking recipes are procedural. You have a list of commands and you go through them step by step. And if you need an oven, you don't have to mention it. It's just there. And when 2 people are cooking in the same kitchen, they're getting in trouble. And that's the downside. That's why programmers don't like to use procedural programming, generally speaking.
Yep.
And functional programming, on the other hand, is totally safe in that aspect, but it's really complicated for beginners. And object orientation is like the sweet spot in the middle. It's still kind of intuitive. For example, if I was to ask you, how did you get here? You wouldn't say, well, I got in my car and then I pushed the gas pedal and stuff like that. You would say, I got here by car. And by saying by car, you're using an object as a representation for a process. So this is very intuitive for people, not quite as procedural programming, but almost as much as that. And that's why it's so valuable, because it allows you to write code that's understandable by every part of the production. And if you have like a player class, you also have a player asset, and you also have a player task, and you also have a player chapter in your game design document. So everybody gets on board and is on the same page.
Yeah, I think it's a great metaphor, I guess, for the game code, the game data. Like, we could, of course, be doing the whole thing in assembly, but that doesn't help us make good games.
Exactly.
I know Ben's keen to get onto these community questions. So, Ben, give us some community questions.
Well, there's only one or two here that I want to bring up. Really, I've turned my video off just to see if we can improve the performance this end. So,
don't forget to jiggle your picture.
Yeah, so we've got one question. We've got one question, Lars, which is how do you guys manage version management for the game assets at your school? That's from 3Arton.
Personally, we use Bitbucket, mostly because we don't use Git, we use Mercurial. Mercurial is conceptually very similar to Git. The main difference is that Git is designed for open source projects, so you have lots of tools that allow you to edit the history that has already been saved. Because of course, if you have like thousands of people working on your project, you can't have every failed attempt of anyone in the history. So you have to clean it up later. But for a small project, you don't want to be able to clean up the history, because that means that you could, by mistake, erase the history. So we're using Mercurial, which is built for those other workflows, like most version control systems. So as soon as you use anything different than Git, you have this other philosophy. And we use Mercurial because it's most similar to Git, except for that one point. And we don't really make a distinction between the assets and the code. In theory, you could have a different repo, a sub-repo for the assets if they're getting too big, or you could use a centralized version control system for the assets, like SVN, for example, or Perforce, because usually they have better tooling and are better equipped for assets. But you can just as easily get along with Mercurial or Git and use the large files extensions of those tools.
Awesome,
cool.
Thank you. And one more question from Keith Scholes, which is, given that Godot is a small engine to start with, does it produce smaller, lighter executables, perhaps better suited to mobile apps?
I'd say yes, but not by far. They are smaller, and you can optimize them because you can build the engine yourself. You can rebuild it and set different build flags. So you can say, I want like a crippled version of Godot that, for example, isn't able to create 3D games, but then the executable won't have to expect 3D games, so it will be smaller. So you can optimize it a little bit more. I'd say the benefit over Unreal is considerable. Over Unity, it's not that big. But I think there still is an advantage.
Awesome. Thanks, Lars. So I'm pretty keen to keep this under 1 hour. So unless anybody's got anything final to add, I would like to try and propose that we end the stream and that we thank everybody for being here and encourage them to go and support the Kickstarter so all of this becomes real for everybody.
Yeah, we are 6 people away from our 1,000th backer, folks. So we are doing very well. We're looking on target, but we'd really like to bring you that multiplayer Steam part of the course so you can actually go beyond where we could have gone without your help. Back it, spread the word. Let's make this happen. Lars, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Listening to my questions about education differences, because I'm fascinated by pedagogy. It's been a lot of fun. Everyone in the community, thanks you so much for joining us. We have another live cast, I believe, tomorrow with Remy. No, was it?
Yep, I think we have a live stream every day now leading up to the complete.
So we have one with Remy about how to adapt Godot to suit your needs. So we're talking about modifying the engine, creating your own tools, all these things, the ways you can do that. And we have a chat with our very own Sam, which about the difference between imperative and declarative languages. A lot of the stuff we'll be taking on today, why these differences matter. And then we have our final live stream party, which Lars, you are more than welcome to join us for. As many people as we can. And we're going to make sure we have an incredibly good time.
And I want to vote for the talk on declarative and imperative. It may sound a little dry, but it's actually really at the core. It's really the most fascinating stuff. Even if you're not a programmer, tune in and listen to it. It's going to be really interesting.
Oh, yeah. It's one of those things that you hear for the first time and go, I've been making all these assumptions I didn't need to make. It really opens your mind to what you can do.
Yep.
So yeah, thank you, Ben, for hosting and for wiggling the cable every time it went wrong. Thank you, everyone in chat. Thank you, Lars, once again. And we will see you next time. Thanks a lot, guys.
See you, everybody. Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye.
Waiting for Ben to find the button.